Happy anniversary again, Christ Universal Temple. Help me say thank you to the Christ Universal Temple Ensemble, to our musicians, to our director, to our conductor. Help me say thank you to Miss Lemmy Battle, the Reverend Dr. Helen Ward Carey, every now and again when we talk, I have to preface my conversation with her with, "It's your bad son." And AJ's not here, but usually he's the baddest of the sons, and I'm just second in the group. But when I say bad, I actually mean it like James Brown. Like bad meaning good. And so happy anniversary, 61 years of teaching people how to live better lives through the renewing of their minds. And so I'm always enamored and fascinated with how it came about, right? The move of the Spirit of God that served as the seed experience for how this all came about. Early 50s, early 1950s. A young woman who, by her own admission, has not yet learned how to live, and the telephone in her home rings, and she picks up the phone, and the voice through the phone says, "You have 6 months to live." Now imagine the gravity of those words when you, in your own soul, you are just learning about yourself. You're just getting an idea of what life has to hold, and the weight of the words that say you are going to die before you have even learned how to live. And so distraught with the news and trying to make sense of the illogical, Reverend Coleman, by her own admission, stumbles into a coffee table. And in stumbling into this coffee table, she disrupts the coffee table so much so that the book that's on the coffee table jumps off of the coffee table. Not only does the book jump off the coffee table, but it lands on a certain page. And not only does it just land on any certain page, but this particular page has some profound words for someone who has just been told that life is over. Does anybody know what those words are? Tell me what those words are. So just think with me about, on the one hand, being told that your life is over, and the other hand being told that God is your help. You can't be sick. And so in the midst of the turmoil in her own soul, Eva the fighter, Reverend Coleman, goes to her mother and says, "Who has the nerve to write these words? Have they not heard about the news that I just got?" And her mother, ever wise, is, "Well, don't come over here. I didn't write the words. But what you can do is go to the place where they had the gall to write those words." And so our founder, the Reverend Dr. Johnny Coleman, begins right then and there on a quest to understand not only herself, but the power that is resident within her soul. And from that experience, we have a catalyst of change and transformation that would not only impact the life of those of us in this room, but we really have no idea how far the influence and impact of her teachings have gone. We know that we're better. We know that the world is better. We know that people we know are better just because we're better. And so in this moment, we, I believe, are confronted with the opportunity to see in the micro experience what is possible in the macro experience. To see and understand and come to terms with this idea of grow, we must. Whose words are those? Anybody know whose words those are? Reverend Coleman's? Yeah, right? And so as we think on those words, and as we allow those words to have resonance for us, not only individually, but collectively, I'd like for us to, in our time together for the next couple weeks, and today for the next couple weeks, is just work with this idea that comes from this book by this gentleman named Tom Rainer. And the book is called Who Moved My Pulpit? And in this book, Tom Rainer says that one of his greatest desires in the whole world is helping churches that have an opportunity to come to embrace and better understand change. And when you hear me say change, or when you hear me say move, I want you to interpret those words metaphysically and hear me saying grow. We must. Because I don't believe for a single solitary moment that the work that we have been called to do is done. Nor do I believe that at this stage, God is done with what he has called us to do. But how many of you know that in order for you to be relevant in today, you have to be able to understand what the needs are of today? In order to be relevant today, we do have to have the courage to grow and push and expand and challenge ourselves to move beyond the safe and comfortable norms that we might have known for years. We have to take a look at things that are comfortable to us and know for certain if they are of maximum impact for where God needs us to go and for the impact that God needs us to have. Something as simple as our worship experience, what it looks like and what it feels like. It is very similar to the way that we were doing it in 1985. 31 years later, we've got to take a look at if that is the best way to continue doing worship service. Is there anybody who's driving their car, the same car from 31 years ago? No? Anybody playing their music through the same format that you were playing your music 30 years ago? Anybody with the same refrigerator from 30 years ago? And because we recognize that there is a multitude of needs, or because I recognize, let me own it. Because I recognize that there is a multitude of need among us, I'm always sensitive to where we are and where we need to be. And sometimes where we are is not necessarily where we need to be. And sometimes we have to have the courage to move from where we are to where we are to be. And for me, I can think of no better time than with the birth of the God idea on her anniversary, for us to begin the dialogue to just really come to terms with the idea of whether or not we agree and we believe that this idea should go forward. Because you may realize this or you may not, but there is always the possibility that when a thing does not change and adapt or move, it faces the certain future of death. There are ministries who were having great impact in the early 50s and early 60s. Friends of ours whose churches are now basically museums because it's an uneasy thing for us to change, move, and confront the reality of grow. We must. How many of you know that there is no growth without change? Those two things must, out of necessity, travel together. And if we do not change, then we can assume that there is very little growth. And sometimes the need to change slips by you because there is such a thing as just being comfortable in the space. All right? I remember for the longest time, Sylvia and I we were testing out paints for what we want, how we wanted to paint our washroom. And there were for months large swaths of sample paints on the bathroom wall, 4, 5, 6 different colors. And we just learned to ignore and get comfortable with what was clearly out of place. Because the more you are in a thing, the more you do a thing, the more natural the environment of that thing comes to you. And so in 1985, there are 3,000 people in this room. But churches often go through this process of gradual or slow erosion. Nothing happens. Nobody's doing anything wrong. It's just that people in churches come in one door and for whatever reason leave out another. And so if in 1985 there were 3,000 people here, or better yet, in 1995 there were about 3,000 people here. Is that still right? Talk to me. In 1985, there were still 3,000 people here. 1995, that's 20 years ago, 21 years ago. Yeah? If in 1985, from 1985 to 2015, if just 8 people were not at service on Sunday in 1995, we would not notice those 8 people missing. If another 8 people the following month didn't show up at service in 1995, we would not notice those 16 people total missing. But if over the course of 10 years, 8 people per month didn't show up, that would be close to 1,000 people every year. If that happened for 2 decades straight, that would be close to 2,000 people who were no longer here. And when you add on top of that just the fact that people don't necessarily get their spiritual or religious content from inside the temple anymore. In 2009, 90% of the people who got their spiritual content came into the church to get it. In 2014, that number was in half by about 45%. Stay with me. Because growth sometimes is triggered by very harsh facts. Like a call that says you only have so much time left. And if you can connect to the realization that God is always a present help, you can bring yourself back to the realization that if you are here, it is because he's not done with you. And if he's not done with you, there is still yet work for you to do. And if there is work for you to do, you have to know how to do that work in the season for which you are called. See, every banana ain't right for the season. Yeah? Sometimes it's just past the season for the ripeness of that banana. And so what must we do? We must be willing to grow and challenge the status quo of our own sense of comfort and safety. We must be willing to take a look at what we do and confirm for ourselves, not through our own sensibilities, but through the things that feed us, as well as the things that can and will attract those who are looking for you. Because the world is hungry for what you have. The world is hungry for what you have, for people who don't need you to be in sin in order to help you get better. The world is hungry for that. The world is hungry for someone who will teach you how to come up from where you are and to use everything that's already within you. The world is hungry for it. But sometimes it's difficult to get past the barriers that we put in our own way. And so we have to be willing, CUT, to have the tough conversations. We've been for a top part of the whole year, been with the leaders, so that as I started to have these conversations with you, the leaders have already been a part of the conversation, so that when I say something that makes you uneasy, go to the person that you trust and have influence with and ask them to help explain what you heard me say. Because sometimes hearing it for the first time can make you a little uneasy, especially when you start talking about change. What kind of change? Right? What kind of change? Change like having a freedom ministry. Change like having a ministry where the ministry of Christ Universal Temple will go back into the Cook County Jail. We already have people ID'd and ready to go into the jail. And when the ministry or any ministry that we launch gets underway, how many of you know that the life of the senior minister or the energy of the senior minister cannot be the only energy and essence that drives what we do? God is infinite. In my spirituality, I am infinite. With this body on, I can't be every place at every time, no matter how much I want to be. And so as we as a ministry begin to look at what we can do to further the impact and reach that we've been called to make, I need you. I do. I need you. I need you more than I know, and I need you more than you know, perhaps. As we move for this freedom ministry, one of the things that I'm asking you to do is to keep everyone who serves in this ministry in prayer, because we are going into Cook County Jail on October 14th for the first time. Throughout the course of the year, I am going to ask you, like I always do, to help us make an impact, just like you're doing right now with the Ambassadors of Love and the Winter Coats. We want to prepare packages to take into the prison on your behalf that will provide not only the spiritual principle-centered support to the people in there, but to also provide just some of the other ancillary needs that while they're in there. I'm going to ask you to provide those things. I'm going to ask you as a community to help us be a part of putting those packages together so that we can help somebody who needs some help. I'm going to ask some of you to join the Freedom Ministry. Yeah. Because here's what I also recognize. Not many of us are too far removed from having someone we love be on the other side of the wall. And so there is value even if we can't touch the people you're connected to. There is value in our doing what we can, where we can, because we're all connected in some way or another. We have to be willing to look at what we look like. We have to take, again, a long, hard look at if we should continue doing worship service the way we did it 30 years ago. Actually, not 30 years ago, the way we're doing it today. It doesn't have to be breakthrough. For those of you who are familiar with breakthrough, it doesn't have to be breakthrough, but it probably shouldn't be exactly as it was in 1985. That's just me keeping it 100 with you. Because we've now recognized that people learn differently, right? We all have different learning styles. And the more consistently through our lesson sermon and through our worship service, the more points of contact we can provide for people who are engaging in this ministry, the better opportunity we have of helping them. And so we need to be able to look at what we do and how we do it. And we have to be willing to do it in a way that lets you own the change. See, here is what I know about change that you don't like. You resist that. Right? It's like the music director who was hired in the new church. Music director came into the service and said, that organ is in the wrong place. I need to move it over there. He said, if I was you, I wouldn't move that organ. The organ director moved it anyway. People got together. They fired him. Yeah. Hired a new music director. New music director came in, looked at the organ, said, that organ is in the wrong place. We need to move it over there. People said, listen, before you move that organ, you should know that we fired the last guy who moved it. He moved it anyway. And they fired him. They hired another guy. But in the interview, they said, listen, we know that the organ is in the wrong place. We don't want to hear no talk about moving it. We fired the last two people because they moved that organ. She said, that won't be a problem for me. That organ is fine just where it is. And she began to serve as the music director and provide ministry. But what she also did was move that organ 1 foot that Sunday. She came back the next Sunday, was pouring into the souls of the people. They were enjoying the ministry. That week, she moved the organ another foot. Following week, she's doing ministry, leading the choir, doing good ministry work. People are impacted by the work of God through her. That week, she moved it another foot. A year later, that organ was on the other side of the platform. Where it was supposed to be. But because it was gradual, and because the people were benefited by the ministry, they came to be okay with it being in the right place. Mm-hmm. I'm saying something to you right there. We've got to get it in the right place. See, because here's what we know. If we keep doing what we're doing, we will keep getting what we're getting. And I know that what we have to offer is too important. What I also know is that the legacy of our founder deserves to live. We have the most dedicated members in the world. We do. And if you all promise me you'll be here for another 25 years, we can roll with it just like it is. But if you can't promise me that, we've got to be willing to grow. Because grow, we must. And it's not at the point where it's a matter of life and death. Because you are healthy, Christ Universal Temple. No, you should hear me. You should celebrate yourself for that. You are healthy. You are healthy. You are healthy. You are healthy financially. We need to be better. Right? We need to be better. We can do better. There's some of us who no soapbox moment, but we all have a responsibility to support the work of this ministry through our giving. Whether that giving is in the form of our tithes, talents, or service. I should never see a lane where there is no usher, and my ushers have been giving their best for 40, 50, 60 years. Because somebody has to take that baton. Somebody's got to do it. Are you with me? And so as we just continue to stay open and receptive to what God needs us to do and what God needs us to be, there are some things that should never change, like the principles you teach. We know that those work when you work them. There are some things that should never change, like the purpose for which you've been called. But then there are some things that we have made sacred through our culture that have to be open to inspection and on the table for consideration. Because nowadays you can put your notes in your bulletin or you can put your notes in your phone. I'm just saying. I'm not saying, I'm just saying. And so I trust that we can, for the next few weeks or next couple weeks, just talk for real. Because God needs Christ Universal Temple. And God needs Christ Universal Temple to be relevant and able to meet the needs of the core member and the member who is yet on the way. We can do whatever we put our minds to. We can accomplish whatever we put our hearts to. Because God is not done with us. And it's not always easy, individually or collectively. But with God, all things are possible.